This show is supported by you. Stick around till after the news to hear more about that and our new Patreon members and one-time donation. This is Cupa Go for November 1, 2024. Keep up to date with the important happenings in the Go community in about 15 minutes per week. I'm Jonathan Hall.
And I'm Shai Nechmad.
Did you have a good Halloween?
Did you have a good week of playing Factorio Space Age and trying to lie to your bosses that you're actually working like the rest of the engineers in the world? Not me, of course.
Of course not. No, that would never happen. No.
I work my ass off. But if you are one of these people, oh my God, isn't the expansion great? Sorry, I'm nerding out about Factorio. This is not a gaming show.
It's not. But because we use Go, and you can't write games in Go, as everybody knows, right?
It's starting with the flame bait right at the top.
We got corrected about that when we said that before.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our weekly Go news show, where we do some news, then we do an ad break, then we do an interview. This week, we have a super interesting interview with Justin McCarthy from StrongDM about Cedar. If you're into like authorization or cybersecurity or anything like that, language design, you should definitely stick around. But let's start with the news, right? Meetups. Let's do meetups.
Let's do it.
So usually we do a round of like, hey, there's a meetup here, there's a meetup there, that date. If you're really into meetups, you're like going, or maybe you're even an organizer, or you thought about it, the Go Remote meetup needs someone to step up as their meetup organizer. Peter Leons pointed it out to us in a different Slack group called Rands. And I don't know how I think about that. The Go Remote meetup group as a general is not one I interfaced with. I don't know if you ever went to one of their meetups. Well, went.
No.
Quote unquote went.
I didn't even know it was a thing. I wouldn't be surprised if this sprung up during COVID or something like that. And I don't know how active it's been. But I could imagine it being really valuable, especially for folks who are in more rural places where there's not an in-person Go meetup. I could see it being really valuable. So I just wanted to bring it on the show and see if somebody wants to step up and organize that.
Yeah, just to clarify what that means is you need to host events online as often as you want. You need to encourage members to participate. It's not easy to get people to come, but it's very hard to get people to do talks. And it's really hard to find good talks. Like it's not easy being a meetup organizer at all. You have a lot more experience in that than I do, Jonathan, right?
I've been
the Amsterdam thing.
I've been the co-organizer. No, I guess I'm co-organizer emeritus of the Amsterdam meetup. But I think it's worth pointing out that this group is a member of the Go Developer Network. We had Wilkin Rivera on the show back last September, a year ago, to talk about that. So that they already have the support of the Go Developer Network, which can help you with a lot of these things, finding speakers and so on and so forth. So it's not that you're doing this, you're not flying solo if you take this on. You do have some support.
You remember that Scrubs thing? I can do this all on my own. No, I know. I'm no Superman. Well, anyways, if you want to organize the Go Remote meetup, you can step up. I think it's an interesting opportunity. Like it feels, if you're an engineer, it feels like these sort of step up opportunities. Something I would recommend to one of my employees if I wanted to like make them a Go senior developer.
And it'll definitely look good on your CV.
For sure. Also, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Really a lot of fun. Every time I had to step in to do something small at a meetup, like, oh, can you grab the pizzas? Or, oh, we have a missing talk. Can you find someone to fill in? There's a lot of excitement there. You're sort of both of organizing and you want to please the people and you feel like I'm in charge of something important, like educational and community and things like that. Anyway, a cool opportunity. We really hope they find someone good.
Yep. Let's talk about some proposals.
Yeah, we have interesting ones.
Yeah, we have a couple old news ones, updates. First one is the slog.discard handler proposal has been accepted. I'm excited about this because it's going to save me writing a longer one line. I can now do it in a shorter one line.
What is the slog discard handler? We already talked about this. But
we talked about this, a few episodes ago. We'll put a link in the show notes if you want to hear the full description. But if you're using the structured logger in the Go Center library and you just want to discard your logs, typically for testing, it's easier to do that. It will become easier to do that now. You just call slog.discard handler and your logs just go into the bin rather than trying to pipe them through to dev.null or dev null or something like that.
just to clarify, they're not going into the bin directory.
No.
They're going into the trash bin.
The trash bin, yes.
We have another update, right?
Yeah, another one that's been accepted. We just talked about this one last week. Is the BuildCach Prog, making that an official non-experimental feature. If you didn't hear the episode last week where we talked about that in detail, link in the show notes. But that's been accepted, so I'm not going to go into that one again.
It is cool to see that they put it in the final comment period. Seems like a lot of people tested it in Go Legacy Island and things like that, and nobody reported any bugs. No change in consensus. Accepted. Really cool. Stuff works.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So these are accepted ones. So now you can just sit around and look forward to them. We want to talk about ones that are still open. The first one is safer file open functions. And if your memory is tingling, it's because we talked about this 20 episodes ago. The episode with Ashley Jeffs.
This is Cupa Go for June 7, 2024. Keep up to date with the important happenings in the Go community in about 50 minutes a week. I'm Jonathan Paul.
There's a proposal here from Neil, Damian Neil, to add some safer file open functions to OS. There's a big class of vulnerabilities around files. I think the most common one is you want to serve files from your HTTP server. Anyway, it's been moved to the final comment period, the likely accept as well. And I really, really like the API. Root represents a directory, and there's implementation for Windows and JS and Plan9, and definitely seems like a lot of thought that went into it. And then you can open a directory that's called root, and then you can do things on that, like create, open, close, make dir all, remove all, chown, chmod, like everything you'd expect. And it's all safe, so you can't jump to relative path names and attacks and things like that. So you define the root of where you want people to operate right now. If you're opening a file server, right? This is the root of the current operation right now. It sort of reminds me of like dockering or containerizing a thing. If your application doesn't want to run in a containerized environment, you just want to prevent these sorts of attacks, a really, really good way to do it. And I wouldn't be surprised if Golang CI lint is going to start reporting on unsafe usage of file.open, use, the root directory instead.
Oh, it already does, and it drives me nuts.
It drives you nuts, and it's right.
It's right, but there's not a clean way to fix half of the reports. Like if you're using GoSec, it tells you you may be opening an unsafe file, but there's not a good way to solve it. There finally will be. So I'm excited about this too. And I also love that if you start reading at the top, the API they suggest is kind of cumbersome and clunky and weird. But if you jump straight at the bottom, like you said, I like the new API. It's very different from the original proposed API. And much better, I think. Funnily
enough, very unlike Go, I think the first design is very much Go-ish, where it's just functions, not like object-oriented things. But file systems are where object-oriented, like very lean object-oriented design usually shines, in my opinion. And this is a really good case. They defined a struct called root, and then they defined all these methods on root. And there's like new root, it's called OpenRoot, but whatever. Really, really good design. I like it a lot. I also think it would be fun to implement because I assume all the security researchers in the world are going to try to find a hole in all these implementations. Like what happens when you do make dir all in and then chmod and then dot and then make dir all again and then dot. Does that count as a root escape or not? Like, you know what I mean? Very, very cool proposal. It's still likely accept. So if you have a comment about the API, or if you want to comment and propose some ways to try to fight this from a security perspective, or you think there are some possible vulnerabilities, or you want to give example of prior art in other languages that you may know, etc., 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 I would definitely recommend jumping on this conversation. One thing that tingles my spider sense is that there are a lot of file systems in Go. Like you can embed a directory using Go embed, right? And then treat it as a file system. I was at a lecture once where someone spoke about they wrote a Go file system that represents Git. So you do Git operations via FS, the FS interface, where commits are like branches and then commits and then files are parts of the path. Moving these to using the open safe, like these not real file systems that are file system but are not classic file systems might not gel super well with this. But I don't know. Maybe they do.
Yep.
I haven't implemented the file system yet.
Yeah, I haven't either.
It's a very cool proposal. Final comment period. Final comment period. Put in your thoughts now. And there's one active one that you read about. I'm really excited about it. I haven't read about it. Teach me about it.
Yeah. So the proposal is to cache link output binaries in the BuildCach. Probably requires a little bit of explanation. So we probably all are familiar with the Go BuildCach, which is one of the reasons compiling is usually so fast. Especially if you use CGO, you may have noticed that the first time you build something that has a CGO dependency, it takes a while because it's building all this C stuff, and that's not so fast. And you may notice if you look at your PS output, you see the C compiler or the C++ compiler running in the background. But on subsequent runs, it's much faster. Well, this proposal is about caching the final linked binary as well. You're wondering, why would that be beneficial? Aren't we already caching the intermediate steps? And so the final link is pretty quick. The primary use case of this would be for Go run. So if you're running Go run, either maybe in a Go generate statement, or as maybe your Docker, or maybe your
CI jobs sometimes do
your
that.
CI
right?
jobs or whatever. You use Go run. Maybe you have a tool that you're that you execute through Go run. This would help cache that final output step, so your Go runs would be faster. So that's a proposal. There's been a lot of discussion on here about when would it actually be useful, when would it not be useful. Should it apply to Go test as well? Because you're doing essentially the same thing. It seems like this is still in the comment period, so there's a lot of opportunity to get in here and weigh in if you have an opinion on this. So the way the conversation seems to be going is toward the idea of doing it just for Go run, not for Go test, not for Go build or Go install, which is probably where the most benefit would come from, without overhead of adding these very large objects to your cache. So it's an interesting discussion about how long should things live in cache, which things should be cached, which things should not. If you have an opinion, go weigh in on the conversation.
So today we already cache packages, but not the final binary, right? Like the link step.
Right.
But the final binary might be super big.
Exactly.
What if I embed a lot of stuff into it, or I don't know, it's just big, uses a big library. Won't the cache just take up a lot of space?
That's absolutely one of the concerns brought up here, and why they would not do it for things like Go build or Go test.
But I guess if you're doing Go run, you're writing the binary to disk anyway. So, that's interesting. I like any cache feature. I'm immediately like, wait, but where are the bugs?
Yeah.
Do you see any obvious pitfalls that this might cause?
I think the caching algorithm itself is pretty solid, so it's not really a question of bugs per se. It's more a question of weighing trade-offs. The speed that you get from caching versus the size of your cache, and potentially caching things that are only ever used once and therefore wasted space.
Cool. We really have a lot of things to go through, and we want to mention all of them, so we'll go to the lightning round. Lightning round. First up on the lightning round, I want to highlight a really great blog post. I wanted to talk about it forever since it came out. Kind of sad it's relegated to the lightning round. We might talk about it at length once I try it out at work. But Go Test Parallelism. So this blog post, in a nutshell, by Robert Lasek, visualizes how Go tests run. So it puts it on like a time graph, and you can just look at when your tests are running. Ideally, all of them begin at the start, right? And then your test suite is just as long as your longest tests are. But in reality, Robert ran it over at 3 Dots Labs, and he saw like a long waterfall where you see like really unoptimized web pages that have these long waterfall network connections. Grab a JavaScript, then grab React, and React grabs Astro grabs Vue. Only then you can view your page. This sort of thing. So if your tests are slow, or if you want to make them faster, check out this blog post. It's a thing I'm passionate about. Developer experience, things like that. Looks really, really cool and is relatively detailed. I just haven't gotten around to trying it yet. I will update when I do, though.
I have a lightning mention that's a little bit different than we've ever done before. It's not really technical, but it's Go related. So I hope I say her name right. Alcione Ribeiro. I don't know. She lives in Germany apparently, but it looks like it might be a Portuguese name. I don't know. But anyway, she has created a crochet pattern for a gopher using a Japanese technique called amigurumi. I don't know what that means, but I would call this plushies as code.
POCs. A few VCs in California just woke up and are like, something else is code. Here's $15 million in funding.
She has a GitHub repo with the crochet pattern and photos of her pink crocheted gopher. I am going to crochet a gopher. I'm not sure when. I have to move to my new house first, but I'm going to crochet a gopher, and I'll put pictures of it on the channel when I do. I love this. So thanks, Alcione. I hope I said your name right. Thanks for sharing this to the community.
I'm really interested in the syntax. You have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9 SC, below 3 SC, 1 ink, open parens, 3x, close parens.
Hey, it makes sense to me. I know crochet, but...
oh, do you?
I do, yeah. I've crocheted before.
Cool. What is the syntax of exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark? Remember to fill the polyester fiber before finishing the gopher mean.
If you can't figure that one out, Shai, you're helpless.
I might let my wife do that one for me. Listen, I just scrolled down and her crocheted gopher with the 3D printed Wonder Woman assets, like the shield and the tiara. Dude, this is really cool. Well, if you're the creative sort, you're into crocheting, it's for you. That does it for our news segment, this part. Stick around for a short ad break and a super interesting interview with Justin McCarthy of StrongDM. Welcome to our ad break. Brief recess here between the high-octane news and the super interesting interview coming up. Thanks for listening to our show. This week, we've gotten a lot of support from our community. We have 2 new Patreon members, Stephen Clark and Kamal Akiyun. I hope I'm saying that right. Thanks for becoming members of the Cupa Go Gophers over at Patreon and supporting us financially. This is a hobby. We do it for ourselves. We're not making money off of this, but it's a rather expensive one. We pay for hosting, pay for our time, obviously, and editing. So this is just the best way to support what we do here. Head over to patreon.com. Oh, I don't know what the / thing is. You know what? Head over to cupago.dev and you can find all the links there. Also, a huge thanks to Remy Zentvikij. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm probably not. For your one-time support donation. I really don't know what to say. Thanks a lot. We'll put that towards the show for sure. Just thanks a lot. We really, really appreciate it. People liking the show, not like liking in a social media sense, but telling us they enjoyed the show, willing to support us, is a really surprising and fun turn of events for us. And it keeps us motivated in doing this show. Anyway, thanks a lot to all our new Patreons and also Remy. Dude, you rock. You can reach us at cupago.dev. You can find links to everything you need there. Our Slack channel, #CupaGo, kebab case with hyphens over at the Gopher Slack workspace. Or you can just email us at news@cupago.dev. That is news@cupago.dev. Other than buying stuff on the Slack store or joining the Patreon or otherwise spending money, it really helps us out if you also spread the word about the show. More listeners, more audience, more people, more fun. So you can leave a review on your whatever thing you're listening on, Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or just wherever you listen to your podcast. Or you can share the show in your work Slack with a friend, a colleague, a co-student, just someone who you know who's into Go or wanting to get into Go. That's all for this ad break. Stick around for an interview with Justin McCarthy about authorization and Cedar.
Hey, Shai.
Yo.
I'm looking around here. I'm sitting here in Guatemala City. I'm looking around at all the trees. I see some cottonwood. I see some palms. I see all sorts of stuff. You know what I don't see?
Wait, what do you see there?
I don't see any cedar trees.
You don't cedar? Any cedar trees?
But if we had, I wish we could get somebody on the show who knew something about cedar.
I believe it's called like horologist or something like that. People who know about trees. But I don't know anything about that.
Hey, Justin, do you know anything about cedar?
I did, while you were doing the bit, I did look up the extent to which cedar trees are indigenous to Guatemala.
Okay.
And it turns out they are.
Okay. They're just not right in this particular area. Awesome.
Right. Yes.
I guess we'll have to talk about other types of cedar then.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Latin name here and everything. So, yep. It's there. They're there.
Very
Just keep
cool.
looking.
Very cool. I'll look harder when I get out of the town or get out of the house. So, Justin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, folks.
Yeah, we have Justin McCarthy here to talk about Cedar. Before we do that, why don't you tell us who you are, and then we'll talk about what Cedar is.
Sure thing. So my name is Justin McCarthy. I am. I'm up. Let's see. You're down there in Guatemala. I'm up here in California. I spend my days as the co-founder and CTO at StrongDM. So our company does. You'll hear more about it over the course of this talk, but. We do a lot of cybersecurity topics, specifically access related topics and authorization related topics. So because of all that security focus, that's what brings me here speaking about the Cedar authorization language today.
Awesome. So let's do it. So sounds like we talked about security quite a bit today. Where does Cedar fit in? Cedar's a Go library. There's also a Rust implementation I see, and maybe others on the way. I'm not sure. Tell us what Cedar does. Yeah, let's start there.
Sure. So the first thing I'll note is that in some ways it may be surprising if you haven't really focused on this problem before, but Cedar is a language. And it's a language that was not at all developed by me or our team at StrongDM. This is actually years of intellectual investment that the team over at Amazon has been making. Okay. Really sort of boiling and distilling all of the decades of large-scale IAM lessons that they've learned. Okay, so for anyone that's worked in any kind of cloud configuration, specifically in AWS, you're going to remember all of the IAM stuff. Okay, so if you think about if you're sitting on top of those, all of that data, all of those user experiences, eventually you're going to think, gosh, maybe we could do better than this, right? And so you put a couple professors on it, a couple smart folks, ask them to think really hard about it, and out pops Cedar, which has a few interesting properties.
So hearing your description there, the first thing that popped to my mind is like, is this Terraform for IAM? How close am I? Am I way off the mark, or is that kind of close to this
okay,
thing?
So I wouldn't compare it to Terraform, but in terms of any of the language properties, but the ambition, yes. So
okay.
the ambition of I want something I can test. I want something with predictable behavior. I want something repeatable. That's all of those ambitions. The implementation is quite different, as we'll get into, and the reasons why the shapes have to be quite different. But yeah, the same sort of folks who find repeatable anything appealing will find a language like this appealing.
Cool. Looking at again the motivation, it's like I want to make sure that all the problems you mentioned, right? Someone wants to write an IAM policy. It's difficult, right? And you need to worry both about about four things, right? The resource you're working on, actor or entities that get the value, the context, and is it allow or deny? And I think there's something else, maybe labels or tags or something like that. It's a lot. Even as someone who works at a cloud security startup, I wouldn't trust myself to write a policy. Like I would like to test it. The way I know how to do it today is I take the JSON of the policy, probably some AI spewed for me at this point, and I put it in the IAM policy checker in the UI, and I wouldn't do it every time, for sure. So is Cedar like more expressive? Is it more testable? Is it easier to learn? Is it hard to learn? Like let's say I am writing IAM policies. I assume, by the way, not just for AWS, but let's just focus on that, also biggest market share. What benefit would that give me?
Sure. So you asked if it was more expressive, if it was easier to learn, if it, and I think obviously when you get a chance to sort of sum up all of the prior art, think it through, and design for a modern era, then you do get some benefit. So personally, when I reflect on all of the other ways of expressing an authorization decision like this in any kind of declarative or procedural language, my eye is drawn to the Cedar syntax. I find it easy to read as a human, which is actually interesting because that was certainly a design goal of the language as far as I understand. Again, I'm not the language designer. But actually, a simultaneous goal that has persisted throughout the development of Cedar is actually one of machine analyzability. So the ability to do automated reasoning and essentially proofs over the language has also been a really key part of the design and the implementation. So even though it's very readable for a human, it's even more readable for a machine. And so that's actually pretty exciting too. When you think about running those test cases, when you think about running those simulations, it's been designed to facilitate all of that at high throughput and very, very high certainty of correctness.
I'm a big logical policy language nerd, and I've been playing a lot with Rego, which is the open policy agent where you define sort of policies. And obviously, when you say prior art, I assume you mean I am prior art, but there's also prior art in the like logic programming space, right? Rego has its roots in, I'm blanking. Someone help me. Prolog, yeah, thanks. And, it's been developed in a few different directions, but it certainly, as some languages has gotten better with more capabilities, more things like that. And also, I assume more approachability. Like I'm looking up Cedar today. I'm like, I have a playground and a tutorial, whatever. I assume if I search for a Prolog, it's going to look, you sure? Did you mean something else? Or is that what you're looking for? But where does your involvement fit in? Let's say you convince someone, cool, logic-ish programming, I define a policy related to IAM, sounds relevant. Where does your involvement come in? Because you say, I'm not a language designer and you haven't designed the language.
Sure thing. So this became a really important part of some product ambitions that we had within the StrongDM product. So a big part of what we do is we connect people that essentially have access to very sensitive systems. So they might have access to a virtual machine or a Kubernetes cluster or a database. So we actually have protocol and identity-aware proxies that sit between the users and those workloads. So when you look inside those workloads and you ask, is it okay for Justin to perform this action at this moment? That's actually essentially an IAM layer that we wanted to add as an overlay to all of these protocols. So if you can imagine, how do you specify the universe of what's possible in an Oracle database or a Kubernetes cluster? You need actually a very powerful language to sit over that. And then we also needed a language that we could embed into those proxies that were going to run at wire speed. So we had performance characteristics and expressiveness characteristics that we needed out of the language. And that's what brought our attention to Cedar at this point, about a year and a half ago.
And Cedar had a Go implementation, or did like you and StrongDM started?
So all of our initial prototyping using Cedar was based on the original implementation, which was all in Rust. Okay, so obviously through bindings, it was very easy to call, and so we were able to validate our essentially our product ambitions. What features did we want out of this thing with the original Rust implementation? Once we moved out of the sort of dating phase and we got into the marriage phase with the language, we realized that we just needed for our proxies, which are implemented in Go, we needed something that was directly in the same runtime, had the same idioms, the same memory boundaries, predictable characteristics, and was in a language that we felt like we could contribute at high velocity to the implementation, to sort of expanding the capabilities of the language itself and the implementation.
I have a question, but there's a loud church bell behind me right now, so I'm going to wait just a second till it's done, and then I'll ask you.
I can turn on, I can tell the imams here to also do their evening prayer at the same time, and we can get all the... Do you have some Buddhist monks behind you? We can get all religions. Although Buddhist monks tend to be relatively quiet, I think. Well, I have one if you want me to... I wanted to pass the reins to you because I'm doing the thing where I always do.
Yeah, I have a question that's relevant to what we just said, but I really want to wait for the sound.
We'll wait. I'll do something irrelevant. Justin, I'm just done with 13 years of beard.
It is an awesome beard.
Do you think that helps your CDO status? People are looking at, that guy knows security. He looks grizzled.
This is actually just a video filter. It's like a TikTok filter. I'm completely clean shaven.
It's pretty good filter. I think you should go into business making filters.
Yeah. Well, it's all pure Go.
Okay.
It's
awesome.
The filters are all in Go.
Right. So you mentioned the dating phase of Cedar. I'm curious what other alternatives you looked at and how they weigh to get, how did they measure up to Cedar that you finally chose? What were the pros and cons?
Sure. So like I said, there's a lot of prior art on this topic. The idea of fine-grained authorization, if you type fine-grained authorization into your favorite search engine, you're going to find a lot of folks that have tried this before, actually decades ago, that have tried this before recently. So this has been an ambition. If you think about back to the beginning of time when authentication was actually completely disparate, every system had its own password, right? And then we all got together as an industry and said, you know what, maybe we can do some single sign-on standards. That was a successful way of transitioning authentication into a unified approach, right? Well, same thing for authorization, which is what happens after you've authenticated. Folks have said, gosh, why can't we externalize this? Why can't we be more intentional about this? Why do we have to write it every time? Okay. And so there are options to choose from. I think we just basically had the advantage of needing a very powerful, deep authorization answer at a moment when the Amazon team had just baked all of their thinking. So it's thinking that essentially reflects the sum of everything that came before it. So one note I'll add in contrast to some of the other options, though, there's actually a little bit of an art of expressiveness. Okay, expressiveness, when we typically say it, sounds like an unalloyed good. It sounds like you can never have too much expressiveness, right? But if you ask a Go developer and then you show them some Ruby or whatever, like maybe you can have too much expressiveness, right? So there's an aspect of that in a lot of the other expression languages where there's essentially too much power. It's inching too close to Turing completeness. Okay, and so the Cedar language was very, very fixed. There's you're not going to get into any kind of recursion. There's not going to be any unexpected looping that's going to happen as a byproduct of some policy statement. And so the language itself is concise in that way. And then the other real innovation that really no other language has is this notion of proofs and the ability to apply machine reasoning so that you can get essentially decidable expressions and decidable policy statements. I know that sounds like a sort of a nerdy language feature, but result of that is you can run essentially large-scale simulations in essentially like set arithmetic space and figure out what would happen if we refactored the policies from this set of statements to this set of statements. And refactoring and reorganizing policies is a very, very real use case, especially the more complex your organization is. So having confidence through change is enormously enabled by the machine reasoning properties of the language.
Really cool.
I do want to dig on that, even though Amazon did a lot of thinking. Rigo, you said performance as one thing. So any sort of policy language that's not that doesn't have any implementations or can't have any implementations that are compiled and like fast, like JSONata or these sorts of JSON manipulation languages, all of these are out the window, right? Because this is someone sending a request to a Kubernetes cluster. They need to, while that request is in flight, get a response from your policy engine. A quick peruse on your homepage shows up a really cool use case of like, wait, is this Justin's normal working hours? Or is someone like not doing it from, like he doesn't usually work Saturdays at 2 a.m. Why is he sending a request to the Kubernetes cluster? I assume this is expressed in a like context-based filter in a Cedar policy, right? Context.time equals outside of working hours, blah, 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 something like that.
Yeah, that's a great example. And we have a lot of examples that are sort of accessible and intuitive. And then if you imagine stacking all of those policies simultaneously, the other really interesting thing is I mentioned a minute ago the sort of set arithmetic properties of the system. Part of how it is performant is related to that. So depending on which variables you're binding, depending on which entities are in consideration at any given moment, essentially you can think of it as the amount of paths that we don't need to fully explore in evaluation is like sort of optimally calculable very, very fast. Okay. And so that means really every use case we've thrown at it, we use the expression wire speed often, but the idea is it's not going to induce any sort of latency in any sort of gesture, any sort of action that any user or machine needs to perform.
So what I'm saying is all policy languages that can't run from like Go or are maybe Turing complete and therefore don't have these sort of Prolog-ish option of mapping out into a search tree and doing the thing you mentioned are out the window. So that's a pretty large number of the policy languages already that are outside the window. What I know, like I'm not an expert in this topic, but I'm familiar with Rego. I think it is like a competitor, right? So if someone is evaluating Rego right now, what you're saying is take a look at Cedar as well.
Sure. Yeah. I think, there's also a little bit of culture of what types of applications tend to adopt what types of approaches. I would say we've obviously seen Rego and have pretty good deployment in, for example, like the Kubernetes universe, right? So there are lots of examples of applications there. I will note actually just yesterday, there's a new blog post live on the Cedar blog. So if you look over there on the blog, you'll see that there's an implementation of essentially Cedar for Kubernetes that is based on the Go implementation. Okay. And the ambition there, this is from the Cedar team and a principal engineer over at AWS named Micah. The ambition there is to unify the essentially admission control and RBAC side of the decision to allow or deny inside of Kubernetes, which has typically been sort of a fractured story. By having it in Go, by having it based on Cedar, there's at least the possibility of bringing those worlds together. So yeah, anything that sort of feels like that, anything where you realize you actually have to sit down and have a design discussion about your authorization system, I would definitely put Cedar up on the whiteboard. One other note, just in contrast to some of the prior approaches, really how explicit it is about actions, how explicit it is about hierarchies of entities that are principles and hierarchies of entities that are potentially resources that you could be editing. It really lends itself to maybe more application authorization. Like, can I share this photo with, if Jonathan shared it with me, can I share it with Shai? Or those sort of decisions, which I'll note, those should be very familiar for anyone that has ever read the Zanzibar paper from Google. That's how essentially all of the permissions inside of the Googleverse are modeled. And that's generally referred to as relation-based access control, opposed to role-based or attribute-based. And I'll just note that Cedar really has an ambition of being sort of star-back. So role, relation, and attribute-based. You can express all of those sort of authorization models within Cedar.
Justin, I'm really curious who you think is the target audience for this sort of thing. I mean, I can imagine a lot of our listeners are like, I just want to write code. I don't care about policies. And if they want to stop listening, that's fine. But who should listen? Who maybe in particular, who should be thinking about this, for whom it's not obvious that they should be thinking about it?
Okay. I haven't fielded that question before. So let me see how I do coming up with an answer. So actually at one layer, in addition to having a very high throughput, identity aware, protocol aware, sort of like data layer within the StrongDM product, we also have a control plane, right? With standard administrative functions, right? Where, is Justin, what level of permissions does he have? Is he allowed to invite other users? Those kind of questions. Okay. So one note is that we have essentially recursively embedded Cedar really around every one of those decisions throughout our product. So we kind of, maybe it's like, everything looks like a nail once you have a golden hammer, but I would say it's really the ergonomics of saying like, well, it's not an editable policy, it's not a configurable policy, but we're still running it running through the same authorization essentially stack, right? For everything. I'll note one dimension of flexibility that is created as a byproduct is it has given us a path to say, well, especially when working with complex enterprises, especially, they have multiple jurisdictions, they have multiple continents and countries. There are times where, for compliance reasons, you want to say, Jonathan on this continent can't approve something from Shai on another continent, right? And it's a weird business rule, right? And it's a weird business rule that if you're a product manager on some SaaS application, you're never going to put that button in the interface, right? Someone's going to ask for it, and it's going to sit in the product management queue forever, right? This gives you a pathway at least, right? To say, well, okay, you at least can say this statement. And furthermore, you can evaluate what impact that might have over your actual traffic. Okay. So I would say, again, back to, I said this earlier, but like, if you've got beyond the most basic authorization question in your system and you realize you have to design something, don't design something without looking at Cedar first.
So the common, no thinking approach, I think, or like the most it depends, but this is the first advice I'll give you approach is, if you're designing anything beyond basic authorization, my first thing would be, look at Cedar to implement it. It would be, go buy it from someone. If you want to externalize it completely and just get it from other named brands. I don't want to name a list because maybe one of them is your competitors and they won't like it. But if I'm building a product and I need a login, I'm not building my own authentication at this point, right? I'm slapping in a sign in with Google page, a button, and many people don't have that for the authorization part. They start building the authorization, the RBAC, inside, maybe because they use a framework and the framework has quote unquote RBAC capabilities, until you find that you're not binding a to-do app and it's not actually as simple as you always say. But again, the common knowledge is, just buy it. I assume also for people who are looking at build versus buy, you might be saying, hey, people at Amazon already did a lot of the thinking for you. You might be able to implement this mechanism with all the heavy lifting being done by Cedar, and you just sending the request, writing a tiny bit of code to wrap cedar.run my policies, then sit for a while and write these policies down, right?
Yeah. So I would say on the build versus buy, maybe another way to think about this is the architecture could provide for lingering a little bit longer on the build and then sort of hybridizing it with the build versus buy, because there's actually a couple more components. We've been talking about the language itself, and that's the thing that decides, is allowed or is denied at a really fine grain. Okay. That's the evaluation part of authorization. There are other parts. What possible properties can we pass in? That's the notion of schema, right? So you have schema just like you would in a database, but for, defining what is the surface of authorization for my application. Then you have the notion of revising and versioning these policies and then sort of unioning them and combining them. That's the policy store. Okay. So each of these components actually need to live somewhere, right? There is an off-the-shelf version you can rent from AWS, but then there are other products out there as well. So if you think of, hey, I like the Cedar shape, you can begin experimenting. Just write your own tests, have your own local, flat file storage of the Cedar policies. And then over time, you can say, hey, there is a subcomponent here where I really want a SaaS to take care of it. And so you can sort of outsource, just the policy store or just the schema definition and schema editing or just the testing. You can sort of push that out to other systems as they come online.
What resources can you recommend to somebody who hears us talking and they're like, that sounds intriguing. I don't know where to start. I want to look at Cedar, but what should I start? I could look at the Go repo and there's examples there, but what's the best place to start getting your feet wet with this?
All right, so there's a great playground available, from the Cedar team itself. So you're going to find that at cedarpolicy.com. Although since this is a Go focused podcast, I will say, starting with the Go, that's one wonderful thing about the language we all love. Starting with the Go is actually a totally great way to get introduced to it. So start with the test, start with the examples that you can see in the repo there, and then go read the implementation, right? Because that's something that, it's very legible. And it gives you a sense of really the magnitude of the kinds of topics that are involved. And actually, if you're making a build versus buy versus DIY decision, it might even help fortify your argument that you need to at least upgrade to something that, you can get off the shelf from GitHub there in the form of Cedar Go, because, there's a lot of ideas in there that you may see how they apply to your application. The cost of experimentation is very, very low. It's just a pure Go like dependency, like anything else, and you can just run it and see how you like it.
I want to flip that question around a little bit. One question I like to ask when we're talking about products the audience may not be familiar with is, who should not use this product? Because we talk about all the great things, but there's always someone who it's not for. Who would you say should just run away from this? It shouldn't be relevant to them.
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, this one I do struggle with because the cost of adopting this is so low. Because you're not taking a dependency that introduces latency or anything like that, and because the expressiveness and you can really model kind of anything. So let me just try and say who should not use this? Let's go with crypto. How about that?
Okay.
so I mean the coins. So if you're doing something with a blockchain. And everything's public and all of the security model is essentially delegated to that way of thinking, then maybe you don't have another RBAC model on top of that. If you're doing something that is just, gosh, I just really struggle to think of cases that don't have some level of permission built in.
I would tell you what I think is people who are excited and nerd out about this stuff, such as yourself, might start writing their side project, which is a super simple site. Sign in with Google, only one type of resource, only one type of principle, and then you'd be like, of course I need Cedar here because I have authorization, but it's a bit early. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I like ridiculous side projects. So yeah. I love turning side projects up to 11. So you won't get me to endorse that view.
Yeah, Jonathan and I last episode just talked about me trying to side project the perfect documentation repository for like 30 minutes, just talking about whether my product approach is correct. I get what you mean. The side project is where we're allowed to turn it to 11, right?
Exactly.
It's not like we have to worry about that product manager and his product suite.
Exactly.
Cool. So it's safe to assume that at StrongDM, Cedar is very much adopted, right? Who is writing? My question is, as a developer, I would spend some time, introducing learning the playground, and then adding the dependency, trying to play around with it a little bit, integrating it somewhere in my product, like some HTTP middleware somewhere, or in your case, even like more advanced, the component itself, all it does is, I assume it does more stuff. But one of the things you've outlined it does is this authorization for the first policy. for the second policy. But I assume at some point you want like writing policies to become easier than once you pay that like first cost, right, of implementing it and integrating it. Are the people who are writing policies now at your organization still developers, or can like product people or even customers like hop in and be like, hey, I wrote this policy. Can you slap it into the product?
Okay, yeah, great. That's a great question. I would say that's another advantage of having sort of a common language, because we actually have examples of all of that. So because our product itself is a policy store, right? We have policies that are essentially, frozen or embedded into the binary, right? And then we have policies that are editable at runtime. Okay. And then we have policies that reflect back on what's possible to edit at runtime, right? So essentially all of the above. Customers have their fields that they're editing that have policy statements. Where we have our own fields that we're editing, and then we have, the product itself, which has essentially embedded policies. In terms of the learning curve and what I would refer to as like the design space, that's what I notice is sort of the most sort of virtuous activity that I note happening is it's the same thing as naming in any other design session that you're in. Like, what should we call this particular resource? Where should we put the attribute on the photo or the folder that the photo is contained in, right? So it's that level of design that it sort of forces you to have that conversation instead of just one person unilaterally throwing a name on there. Right. And so as I notice the different application teams adopting Cedar and applying them, they're going through those design conversations and, how to model how to model a superset of permissions in Kubernetes versus how to model a superset of permissions in Microsoft SQL Server. Right. Those kinds of topics come up. And the modeling environment and the schema environment of Cedar gives us a way to host those conversations.
So what you're saying is people who, let's say I want to model, well, I'm coming from a cybersecurity company in the cloud security space. So that's the example I'm going to give. Please forgive me that it's boring. Access to cloud resources by people, right? Like, can Justin access this S3 bucket, which is where all this thing originated, right? We were getting back to the beginning of the conversation. I don't have to be a Go expert to talk about this policy because I can do it in Cedar. Sounds like what you're saying is the learning curve is pretty steep. Like, I'll get on pretty quickly. I'll understand stuff quite fast. And I'll be able to reason about the things I want to model in Cedar without a long, okay, now I'm learning Cedar for a month before I can jump on it.
Yeah, I would say it's actually, again, sorry, I'm just going to refer back to Go. A very common thing that I share with folks that are curious about Go. It's like I just ask, are you a programmer? Yes. You pretty much already know Go. What you don't know yet is the culture. What you don't know yet are the idioms and how to name things. But you pretty much know Go. I would say the same thing about the Cedar language. Like, if you have seen any kind of expression language, if you've seen any kind of organization and mix of expressions and data in any format, you'll instantly parse it. Okay, so you won't need it explained to you. So in some ways, you already know it, right? And it's really about what is the culture of designing the names of the attributes. How do we organize them into hierarchies? How do you, in set arithmetic, if you're allowing things and then denying things, or permitting and forbid, to use the parlance of Cedar, how do you actually join those together with negative conditions in a way that both achieves the policy result and maintains readability?
I think I'm going to use Cedar. I'm going to look at using Cedar for a project I'm working on right now. So it sounds like it might solve some problems I have and keep me from reinventing the wheel.
You have converted one person, and people who are just listening via audio and maybe skip to the interview don't know, but Justin carries a magnificent beard. And the first thing that popped in my mind when you converted Jonathan was like, hey, he's like that guy from Age of Empires 2 that does like, and you know what I'm talking about? Anybody here on the call play Age of Empires?
I don't, but it is here in the US, it is Halloween at the moment. So I'm going to very quickly go buy that game, play it through, figure out the personality of that character, and then embody it before sundown tonight.
You're playing like blue, someone else is playing red. You can buy these sort of monks, and they're called wololos because that's the sound bite they do. They go and wolo, and then they turn like red units from your opponent into blue. Okay. You just cedared Jonathan like that.
I'll be dashing through the neighborhood doing that tonight then.
Cool.
Well, Justin, I want to ask if there's anything that we should have asked about that we didn't? What are the important things that you want to talk about that we haven't touched on yet?
I think we've covered a lot. I will just note that, all of this work, all the smarts, really the Amazon team spent a ton of time. You can go watch plenty of videos on the subject. They've just been thinking about it so deeply for many years. And I'll just note at StrongDM, we just fell in love with the language. And so we're sort of, we're doing our part to make a Go native idiomatic version in the Cedar Go project. Okay. So if you find elements, I would just encourage all these Go listeners out there, give it a try. We want all that feedback about things that were surprising or unexpected that are in the API design. As you know, that's like always for an early project, that's always the kind of feedback you're thirsty for. And so please send that feedback in all the usual ways. You're just going to be able to find the repo out there. We're paying attention to the issues. And as you can see, the commits are coming like pretty fast and furious right now. So the language and the implementation is a work in progress right now. It's being very actively developed. So encourage all your requests to come in.
Awesome.
As you have them.
So you're not doing it, so I will. Also, looking at the StrongDM website, looks like there's open positions in the engineering department. So,
well, I mean, there are always open positions in the engineering department, but I do want to say, I'm just going to anti-sell here. It's only for people who really love hard problems and solving them in Go. So so I don't know. So, may not be for you.
No, our listeners just like easy problems. They just write the same like HTTP server over and over again.
Okay. Oh yeah, that's not the. That's
There's
not this.
these
Sorry.
Listeners, 99%, and Josh Bleeker Snyder is writing the compiler, and that's pretty much it.
I have one spicy question I want to ask before we move to closing out the interview. There's been a lot of news in the last couple of years, I would say, about open source projects going semi-closed source. What are the chances of Cedar Go switching from Apache to the Winamp license?
Oh my gosh. I don't know. I'm fine making predictions. Zero. How about zero? This isn't like, you can just compute the financial motivations of everyone involved. Like this is something where more adoption is better. Like, and this is in terms of the layering of your stack. This is so fundamental that you want to kind of know everything about it. Okay. And so I would say, no, this is definitely, we benefit from these very large organizations, these hyperscaler companies that are able to invest really high quality, thoughts and sweat over years to create this stuff. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I don't think they jealously guard components that are as fundamental as this.
Sure. Not Justin in our podcast 2 years from now. All right, so we're announcing Open Cedar. All right. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, it does make sense. Like when you think about the things that Amazon did in the open source space in relation to licensing, not just Amazon, but they are definitely a highlight player there. It's like full products. It's not like your query language. It's your Elastic server. It's not your JSON storage facility. It's your MongoDB. Like it's a thing you can sell. And there's just no way they can sell Cedar as a language. I do believe that they might do offerings, and it's totally fine that they do closed source offerings that they pay, including the IAM Policy Center and other things maybe within Amazon that might even compete with StrongDM. But I definitely believe that they would benefit from keeping Cedar open. That does make sense.
And you'll find that today, Amazon verified permissions. If you're interested in the how can I pay Amazon for this, Amazon verified permissions is the way to pay Amazon.
Yeah, we built a very complicated access system, so now you can pay us to verify it.
I'm always looking for ways to pay Amazon, so I'm glad that that's there.
Cool. We usually ask towards the end of the interview stumper questions. Last year it was what would you take and what would you from another language into Go, and what would you remove from Go? But we basically covered the entire feature list. So this year it's when did you start learning Go? Like when did you get into Go, Justin? And what sort of was challenging or surprising to you? You mentioned the language is pretty lean, but there's like idioms or maybe culture that could be surprising.
Sure. Okay. So I will note, as much as I like personal projects to be experiments and turn them up to 11, but I also can be curmudgeonly about languages at some point. So at some point, I felt like I didn't need Go. Okay. And I sort of turned my nose up at it, and I felt like I had all of I had everything I needed in my sort of portfolio of languages that my fingers were fluent in. Actually came down to right at the beginning of StrongDM, I did a bake-off between a number of languages. The moment I realized that we were going to have this very, very high throughput data plane use case. So we needed to handle packets very quickly, needed to disassemble them, needed to reassemble them, needed to do all that at wire speed. And so I had a bake-off between Go and then a few other languages you would know. And actually the surprising thing to me from the beginning is that there was just no contest in terms of the developer experience. I just kept saying like, wow, it's working already. I'm done. And so that was with like literally, the Go book open on my desk and just typing away by myself. And I was just done. And there were other languages where I was still installing. Right. And so that was a profound revelation. The asterisk on that was always, well, I haven't fully explored the GC. Maybe there's going to be, certain kinds of surprises that are going to come later. I'll circle back to that later and make it, remake this language decision or push some stuff down to see if needed. Nope, never needed to come back. Go is caught up in terms of performance for everything we've thrown at it. Okay, so that was my introduction to Go. In terms of biggest surprise, one of the sort of like taste judgments that unfortunately we all have to make about a language is related to dependencies in the dependency ecosystem. So the experience of installing. Obviously, we all went through a bunch of different models in Go at the beginning. And so I would just say the surprising thing was how slow getting to consensus on dependencies and defining what and then installing them. But because of the Go tools, because of Go install, Go get, having that as sort of the primitive in there meant that regardless of which modularization scheme we were sort of experimenting with at the time, they all were kind of fast and had like a unified sort of caching and download model underneath. So I guess the surprising thing is how long it took to get to consensus, but then how, I don't know, maybe people still have opinions on this, but I've just always felt that all of the schemes worked better than a lot of the other languages out there. So dependencies, thumbs up. I love Go's model.
Awesome.
Cool.
I like that answer. Well, before we wrap it up, Justin, how can people get in touch with you, I suppose, if they have questions for you specifically? We'll have a bunch of links that we've talked about already in the show notes for people who want to look at Cedar and all these other things. But if they want to reach out to you, how can they do that?
Sure. All right. So if you're ever in Redwood City, California, you can just walk up and down the street and eventually you'll bump into me. If you want to do a more digital option, I prefer email. Email is great. So just justin@strongdm.com. So send me an email. I'd be happy to hear from you.
Awesome. Ooh, that founder email, no last name.
Yeah, definitely no last name.
That's so swaggish. And when we started when I started my previous company, they were like, of course, no last name. And I was like, no. Everybody does their email with the last name because everything has to be formatted. And the founders went ahead and did a first name basis only. Anyway, well, I hope there are no other Justins in the company.
Well, yeah, unfortunately, I think it's inevitable when you have a reasonably common name but there's only one first name account available. So it's already been ended out. Sorry.
Cool. So justin@strongdm.com if people want to follow up.
Well, Justin, this has been fun and educational. I'm happy to learn about Cedar and give it a try here on one of these projects I'm working on. So thanks for educating me.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, sure thing. All right, folks.
Until next time.
Thanks again to Justin for coming on our show, and thank you all for listening. You can find the links to all the things we mentioned down at the show notes. And again, this was super fun. Thanks a lot, Justin, for coming. He's not on the air right now, but it was really a super interesting interview. And you don't know this, but I was 15 minutes late, and both Justin and John were super gracious about it. That's a lot of fun. And we'll see you all next week. Program exited. Goodbye.
Program exited. Goodbye.